So Jamie's about to speak some Japanese. He does actually know his shit, so it's not naive like Westerner. Yeah.
For reference, for the listener, just so you know that I did come upon this knowledge honestly. I'm a second dan black belt in karate. I did karate from the age of 6. I was a national champion in karate. I taught karate for a long time. And so I was reading books about Zen Buddhism and Japanese swordsmanship to kind of further inform my practice as a martial artist, which is why I know this shit.
Yeah.
I'm not actually a weeb. I had a professional reason to know this stuff.
And what I might do is isolate that part and put it right at the beginning and go, this is why he says the stuff right at the top of the episode.
This is why Jamie just goes off on one about 15th century samurai in this one.
I was saying, no, specifically the speaking Japanese right at the start.
Right,
like
yeah,
that.
the really offensive bad Japanese.
Exactly, but if I put that at the beginning, if I put this right now in the beginning, then people might be like, I'm now prepared for him to speak actual Japanese. Hello and welcome to the Comic Literate podcast. The podcast does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, and penny dreadfuls. I'm your host, the soon-to-be known as Comic Stan, and with me as always is my magnanimous co-host, it's Jamie.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Is that cultural appropriation?
Hey.
Yes, it in fact is.
Hey, Ryan-san.
We are doing cultural appropriation, but in the way where it's like a clumsy attempt to be relatable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enough of an eponophile that...
Is that like a posh word for weeb?
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
You're feeling particularly Japanese in this episode, I'm guessing?
Hey.
Are you going to keep this up for the entire episode?
Hey.
How long do you think before people switch off?
Hey, son.
Is this offensive?
Yes.
How much of it do you want me to cut out?
All of it.
Okay.
No, we leave it in. Like when I'm mildly offensive, that's my prerogative.
It's entirely up to you if we leave it or not. I've maintained a neutrality that I think I can refer back to in a later court case.
At least I've been speaking actual Japanese.
I mean, that does help.
Yeah.
Although it does remind me of, again, like I mentioned, the weebs who are like, I'm a bit of a Japanese expert. And then you're like, how? It's like, oh, mainly animes. It's like, I don't think that's quite...
That's not how this works.
That's being like, I'm an expert on America. Why? Because of The Simpsons. And actually, now that I think about it, that's actually probably more accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe it's the same the other way. I know. What's the version of like, someone would think they know England?
Doctor Who.
Yeah.
It's an American who's really into Doctor Who.
Yeah. It's like, being like, oh, I love England. Bloody Daleks everywhere. That must be an arse.
Yeah, exactly. So they either like Doctor Who or Sherlock.
Or Monty Python.
Yeah. Sometimes some of them will have watched The Office and then watched the original Office and been like, you Britishers are all a bit awkward.
Britishers, yes, exactly.
Britishers,
yes,
absolutely.
That's it. Exactly, yeah.
That's the plural.
This is nowhere near the same relatable scale at all to like poor impersonations of non-white languages, whatever. But what I will say is it's cultural appropriation whenever America redoes a British TV show.
Fucking A. My favorite one I ever had is I met an American and they were like, oh my God, yeah, my family are from Britain. My great granddad was from Dublin. And I sort of looked at them and I was like, you don't know enough about Irish history to be flaunting your Irish heritage, because Dublin is not in Britain and any actual Irish person would punch you in the face.
It's a really weird thing with like Americans who have that one ancestor and they're like base their whole entire... Although we do have that sometimes. The British equivalent of that is some people claim to be Scottish when they've got like 1/16th Scot in their family.
Or Danish or Scandinavian in some way. Like
always the other white ones.
Yeah, they grow a big ginger beard and they're like, I'm definitely Danish.
I'm basically a Viking.
And I've been so guilty of that.
I was going to point out, but you own your prejudices and your...
We own up to our peccadillos.
Yes, exactly.
By the way, you called me magnanimous?
I only need to go back to magnanimous.
Magnanimous. That's very kind of you.
Yes. I think if I had remembered, I was going to do zestful again as a bit of a joke.
It would have been the end of the podcast, Ryan.
Because the previous episode may or may not have been the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so depending on release.
One of the ones we did before.
One of the previous episodes
That was a good time though, wasn't it?
That was a great time. And I think we're in for another good time because
I've been looking forward to this for days.
Well, you've seen the episode title, but just in case you are blindly downloading every episode, and we love you if you are, but just in case you are, blindly downloading, we are dipping our toes into the manga, the very famous manga, very well known, Demon Slayer, which was, I think, prompted a bit because we've always had a bit of we should do more mangas because we are Westerners. We typically focus on Western comics and graphic novels, but mangas is such a huge area that I especially feel very uninformed in, unexperienced in, and it feels like a big part of the comic,
It also gives me an opportunity to flex my knowledge about Shintoism and the yokai, which I don't often get. It just doesn't come up very often.
And is that specific to this title?
I mean, I'm going to make it.
You're going to cram it in.
It's very relevant. It's incredibly relevant, yeah.
Well, that is lucky. I think I came for this more from the tropes of this kind of story, which, I mean, we'll get into it. But yes, it's Demon Slayer, which also has a second part of the name, which I might be butchering as I attempt to pronounce, which is, so it's Demon Slayer, and then it's Kimetsu no Yaiba, or Yaiba, which translates to Blade of Demon Destruction, which I do love something about the Japanese translations where, and this actually comes as a criticism later in the dialogue, but it's very literal translation. So they literally say, like, this word means this word means this.
It's a very literal language.
Exactly. And I think that is actually going to be my first, criticism of it is the dialogue, which I found, it was a bit, because literal, I found it, this is probably my only criticism, and I don't know if this is specific to this title or just translated mangas in general, that it was quite a literal, a bit stilted dialogue.
I have a lot of experience in this because one of my favourite novelists is Haruki Murakami, and obviously he writes in Japanese, and so I've only ever read his work translated into English by an amazing translator called J. Rubin, and you tend to find there is a very particular character that Japanese takes on once it's been translated into English.
Right.
And so, the same way that you can sometimes forgive certain comic book shenanigans, I feel like this is the Jamie forgiving manga shenanigans episode.
Yeah.
Because definitely I didn't get that same impression, but that's because I've, for 15 years now, one of my favourite novelists has been a guy whose work I've only read translated from Japanese into English, and so I'm really accustomed to it.
So do we think, like with me and superheroes, that there's an element of once you care more about the characters and the stories and everything, and I don't mean for one specific title, but just across a genre, once you make that connection, you just overlook things that might more jump out to new readers? Yeah,
absolutely. And again, I've read One Piece, I've read Dragon Ball. Like, I'm probably more familiar with manga than you are.
Yeah, definitely.
I've read more manga. I've not read a lot of manga. Like, people have been telling me to read Bleach for years, and I've just not bothered with it.
Of the two of us, you are the manga expert.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I've certainly had more experience with it. And to be honest with you, this didn't jump out to me as particularly bad manga dialogue. It's certainly less stilted than the first chunk of Dragon Ball.
I tell you what, it in a comparison, so we know, like, again, referring back to the TMNT episode, the stilted, like, 80s superhero comic book dialogue was a bit like, hero is in an alley, and because they're alone, they are announcing their thoughts, or they're speaking their thoughts out loud as just a device of, like, carrying on the story. Yeah. There's a lot of that in this, not exactly in the same way, but it reminded me of that same kind of stiltness. But I think I'm very aware of the fact that I might not be getting the originally intended way that language was meant to be delivered in English versus the original Japanese.
100%, and we'll get into this. With Japanese fiction, there is a reliance on these tropes and ideas that Japanese people would all be super familiar with that are kind of alien to you.
Mm.
And so when you're reading Japanese fiction, you'll come across a setting or a character or an idea, and there is this whole set of associations that the author was anticipating being there that you just don't have as a Westerner.
Exactly.
And I think Japanese fiction is almost more tropic in some regards than Western fiction is.
Yeah.
Because it's a small island with a population that was incredibly insulated for an awfully long time. And so their storytelling traditions are incredibly entrenched. And so, I think there is a certain amount of this that actually maybe because I have more of the context, once I start giving you a bit more of the context, you'll be like, oh, fuck, that makes sense.
Maybe.
You know?
And there's some areas that I was careful to criticize, like, because of these additional pieces of context, which I don't think you can fault anything for. And then maybe there's some other stuff, we'll get into the nitty gritty that might still fall under it. But going into a bit of the details of the title itself, because what's like with the TMNT, this is a original title of what is a much larger franchise, which I think we could top off a little bit first. And especially because I learned the pronunciation of the writer and illustrator,
go on.
which is another single person, so another rare one for us, one person doing it.
Again, common manga, I think.
Yes, a lot more common, yeah. And the writer and illustrator's name is Koyoharu Gotouge. I think I've got that. Yes, Koyoharu Gotouge. I think that's...
You haven't anglicised that too much.
That's the overly anglicised pronunciation of it. I don't dare, for risk of sounding like the person who goes into Subway being like, like a Mexican restaurant, be like, can I have the quesadillas? And you're like, just say quesadillas.
Quesadilla.
They just say it Western.
I want some chorizo.
Just say it Western style. But then the complete opposite end of that is I've been in a Subway years and years ago, back before I realised Subway was dog shit.
We've talked about this in the podcast before.
But I was there when someone was asking, can I get some jalapenos on that, please? Like, so there's a middle ground, I think, where it's like, I'm Western, I'm just going to say it Western, but I'm at least going to pronounce the letters in the right way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But so this single person wrote the entire manga series, as far as I could tell, or at least the main bulk starting with it. And what's especially interesting, it started only in 2016, and it's gone strength to strength very quickly, by February 2021, 150 million copies, and was the...
Oh, it's been a sensation, hasn't it?
Yeah, top-selling manga for 2019-2020, and is the 9th most successful manga franchise of all time, which... For starting in 2016, like, that's crazy. Something's come out and become so popular so quickly.
Absolutely.
And the other little tidbit is there's a film adaptation. So there's
Oh, sick! I didn't know that.
So there's the televised anime, so like an episodic anime. But then there's also tie-in films. This film, I think, with like some other animations, was originally meant to be a straight to DVD. Turned into, because it got a bit of a acclaim being, anticipation being already a famous franchise, moved to a cinema release.
Oh, that's dope.
And actually became the highest grossing Japanese film of all time, and one of the top grossing films in the world.
Even more so than all of the great classic. You know exactly who I'm about to say.
Spirited Away, that Studio
Ghibli.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was...
Because I love Studio Ghibli films. I prefer them to Disney.
The film grossed over $500 million worldwide. Highest grossing film for 2020. And highest grossing Japanese film and anime film of all time. So we are getting into this very late, despite it only starting like 7 years ago. But so now we're finally here. We're finally on board the train. And
what did you think of it?
I thought it was very familiar a story. And I was trying to place earlier, it's one of those things where, when you read something or watch something or whatever, you take in some fiction, you realize there is a trope, this is a trope, and you hadn't realized that before. So this trope being the young adult whose family are killed by something, and then they are taken in by an expert on the thing that killed their family. And they become a fighter, hunter, slayer of said thing. And only when reading this did I start to think about what are the things like this in this trope. The ones I could think of immediately. One, what we've done on here, something's killing the children.
Yeah.
Bit more of a well-known one, The Witcher.
Yeah.
Maybe not initially from the start, but the backstory becomes something like that. The most basic, not all the same tropes, but a very general version of the trope. I thought of The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah.
So I've not actually read anything like that, but I know the general trope of it is
there's also something at play here that kind of reminded me of that God of War game and The Last of Us, where you've got somebody looking after kind of defenseless person in an ambivalent world. He's kind of he has that the protagonist has that caretaking role for his sister, doesn't he?
Yeah. And we also referred this in the TMNT one a bit, which was the I will take you in and show you the way of my people kind of trope. And that is this as well. So for something that came out in 2016, I thought it's redoing a somewhat well-known trope.
Yeah.
Or at least it's a trope that's been not overdone, but has been done to a certain extent before.
Yeah.
But saying that, reading it, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed this version of that trope.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it was paced in a way that made me want to see what happens next. Yeah. I struggled initially with the manga reading right to left. Like literally the 2 times we've done a manga, I've gone, oh, bollocks, it's this way. Oh, right. Readjust my eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Learn to read right to left.
Yeah. But ultimately, I think the biggest thing for me, I enjoyed the little bits of lore you were getting about the world building within this, which is something I keep banging on about with these kind of texts. And it made me want to know more about it, which I think is the most important thing.
I resented you getting here to talk about it because I was having so much fun reading it.
That's the highest compliment you can pay to a comic that we do on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really enjoying reading it.
What are the things you enjoyed specifically?
Well, again, a little bit of an eponophile. So I generally have a soft spot for Japanese fiction anyway. And so I think I was really enjoying watching a character who was a bit similar to Red. Not Red, very different to Red. But yeah, I was just kind of enjoying the general manga tropes, and I was just kind of enjoying immersing myself in a manga a little bit. I don't know that there was anything specific that I was enjoying that doesn't lead me on to some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about that currently would make no sense.
Right.
So yeah, maybe, yeah, I mean, I was enjoying it on that level. I was really enjoying watching some of the yokai stuff that I've been reading about for a little while now come into play in a piece of fiction. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, I know that that's all over Japanese anime and manga, but it's nice. It's fun to see it at play.
And now, obviously, I 100% know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, of course.
But for the listeners who might not know, do you want to maybe get into a bit what that is?
Well, the yokai is a feature of Japanese folklore.
Right.
And it's the monsters in Japanese folklore. And so when you dig under the surface in anime, like late 20th century anime, it's fucking everywhere. It's the basis of Pokemon and Digimon. There was an anime cartoon that I really enjoyed as a kid called Flint, I think, which is this kid who had a hammer, which he could use to turn these evil monsters good again. And that's all based on the yokai tradition.
Which also reminds me of Pokemon, which was training and
yeah, absolutely.
capturing.
And then the yokai are super, really, really raveled up in Shintoism as well. And so there's just this really strong undercurrent theme of the native Japanese religious practices flowing through this text.
And the Shintoism, obviously, again, I know, obviously, but for the listeners.
So Shintoism is a native Japanese religion. It is kind of related to Buddhism, but it's actually more of a native Japanese pantheism, if you know what I mean by pantheism.
Again, I mean, do you want me to explain it, or do you want to explain it?
No, so pantheism is a religion that has lots of different gods.
Right, like a polythea something.
It's not the same as polytheism.
Right.
So polytheism is where you have a pantheon of gods. Pantheism is more where you have local gods. And so the Norse tradition is polytheistic, but it also has a certain level of pantheism because different people from different areas would maintain shrines to different gods for different reasons. And so, like, if you were a farmer in the Norse tradition, in the Saxon tradition, you were more likely to have a shrine to Thor. And if you were a soldier, you'd probably have one to Tyr.
Right.
And in Japan, there were Shinto shrines to local deities. So these local, they were kind of yokai as well, but these local creatures and myths, you would have shrines to them that you would pray to for safe passage through mountain passes. And so a Shinto shrine that you would see in Edo, old Tokyo, would be really different to a Shinto shrine in Kyoto, because you had a different set of folklore and different pantheistic gods. Does that make sense?
Yep. And just to contribute from my side, a little known fact, Tokyo and Kyoto are anagrams of each other.
Yes.
So that's my little bit.
Yeah. But yeah, old Edo. Edo is the original name for Tokyo, and it's a very interesting place.
Right. So was it Yaoi? Yokai. Yes, close enough. So did that have the similar amount of? So you said about like capturing and training, or turning them good.
Yeah.
Did it have as much of the slaying as this text, or is that is that how this does it different?
Yeah, that's one of the ways that this does it different. And the Oni, which are the demons, the way that they appear in this is very traditional, and I'll get into that later when we actually start talking about them.
Yeah.
But the idea of kind of going in and slaying them, they were generally something that you were wary of and you tried to appease. You wouldn't necessarily go out and start scrapping with them.
So my theory, based on what you've just said, is could this be a bit of a Western-influenced manga, in the sense that maybe appealing more to the more modern, fighter fighting against evil? And obviously, I'm not saying that's always been it. That's always been a thing in lore and and mythology.
Yeah. So this is definitely an extension of Japanese folklore, and not everything that is happening here and that is at play here is directly taken from the folklore, but it's heavily informed by it, and they're using it as kind of a basis for their story. Which is really interesting. And I think that's what I found the most interesting about it, actually, now that you've forced me to name it, now that we're actually talking about it and I've developed my thoughts on it.
That's why we're here. It's why we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, do you know what? It's a really fun practice, isn't it? In actually developing your thoughts on something to the extent that you can talk about them. And I don't think it's something that a lot of us do very often. And having the podcast gives us an opportunity to do that, and it's really great fun.
We kind of force each other to articulate, whether consciously or unconsciously, to articulate feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, 100%.
And hopefully people are listening for that valuable insight, or at the very least for the dick jokes. But when I saw, obviously, Demon Slayer, it was only then when reading it that I kind of linked the Slayer part of it to a lot of Western stuff like demon slaying, vampire slaying, so like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Blade from Marvel, which probably themselves are then rooted in things older than that, which I just don't know about. But that's what made me think of a Western influence on this Japanese specific monster lore.
So there is traditionally a relationship between certain elements of the folklore and swordsmanship, but generally that relationship isn't swordsman going out and killing.
Right.
The yokai or the oni or whatever it will be. Generally, swordsmanship is directly about protecting your retainer. So protecting the local shogun that you were employed by, or if you were a ronin, defending your honor, or finding a new retainer. There aren't a whole lot of stories in the Japanese folklore about people directly fighting with the yokai and the oni. It's very much stories about people being wary of them, and often the yokai would come from places that humans in every culture have a certain kind of folkloric wariness of. The woods, the mountains, snowy places.
I'd say I got to issue 10, you got to issue 15.
15, yeah.
There's in that area, there's a lot of, I'd say the first 7 to 8 are almost exclusively mountain-based settings. And I'm guessing that's to do with the original lore of the monsters.
Particularly the Oni. So the Oni are known as demons. In the Japanese folklore, they're heavily anthropomorphized, but they'll have this kind of slightly demonic cat-like appearance. The big teeth, the powerful forearms, that kind of almost feline head shape that they take on when they form in Demon Slayer.
Yeah.
Imagine a more exaggerated version of that, and you've got an Oni.
Right.
Oni would steal children away. That's what Oni did. And they lurked in the remote villages in the mountains, and they lived in the woodland between two villages that had a mountain in between them. And so really they were, I mean, an extended metaphor for places that it was dangerous to go.
Yeah.
Places that, you know, you're in the woods on a fucking mountain, it's cold, it's Japan. This is a place where you could die. And so they're kind of...
You think every culture has its, this is why this area is dangerous.
Yeah,
lore.
I mean, you look at the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales and the relationship with the woods in those, if you go into the woods today.
Yeah.
And so I think every culture has a similar relationship with its woodland, and there's always folkloric stories that come out of the woods. Even if you look at some classic British folklore heroes, Robin Hood being one of them, he was in Sherwood Forest. He lived in the forest. He was, you know, a raider who lived in the forest. He was a reason not to go into the forest if you were a nobleman. And so, yeah, there's a certain element of that at play here. And it's very telling that our protagonist and his sister come from a remote mountain village.
Speaking of the design of the Oni and the demons, what do you think of the art in general?
It's great.
So one of my things when looking at it is I enjoyed the art, but one thing I thought was with manga in general, does it feel like, am I right in saying, or is this just a completely naive take, the manga is a bit more of a homogenized style?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a thing in Western culture where we refer to something as having anime eyes.
Yes.
And that's because there's such a homogenous style. If you actually look at early illustrations of the yokai, manga is highly informed by it.
Yeah, makes sense.
I have a couple reference books in there that I can like take pictures of and we can put in somewhere, maybe even into the YouTube videos that come out of this conversation.
Sure.
Because the way that manga is drawn is very, very reminiscent of early Japanese art. It's an art style that is, again, quite firmly linked to the traditions of that country and that culture.
So because the art style is a bit homogenized across the genre, I feel like there's less to talk about than when we talk about Western comics, because they're so much more varied in their style.
There's more diversity, isn't there?
Yeah.
Well, there's more diversity in Western comics in general. When we get into superhero comics,
yes,
they're kind of their own tradition, aren't they?
We say, so with the Western, I think specific companies like the big two, Marvel and DC, have their, as we coined, or we found out the coined phrase, the house styles. Whereas manga does seem to be styles across the genre rather than one company.
I mean, you've got to remember that there were certain magazines where these stories would appear as collections. So Shojin Jump is a really great example.
And this was actually, I think, published by Jump Comics.
Yeah. So this is a Shojin title. This is a Shojin Jump title. And so Shojin Jump published Dragon Ball, for instance. They had a hand in Pokemon stuff. They promoted a lot of Pokemon stuff back in the day. You know, the Dragon Quest series, which is a really popular RPG game. Yeah,
I've heard of it. I've not experienced it.
If you're a Japanese RPG fan, you are more likely to be a Dragon Quest fan than you are a Final Fantasy fan.
Right.
Dragon Quest is huge. Again, that looks very Shojin Jump. And so it may well be that actually a lot of the manga that you've seen exported to the West has a whiff of the Shojin Jump house style to it. I don't know. This is a hard and fast fact. I would love to learn more about manga and have a deeper understanding. But my assumption going into this is that some of that kind of homogenous flavor that you're seeing comes from the same place as the DC and Marvel art styles, where actually there's a bunch of people all kind of collaborating with each other and working with each other and competing with each other, making this stuff, who are, you know, ribbing from the same places and the same art style and that kind of stuff.
One thing I would say, did notice some small things that I liked and I thought were unique to this title. Specifically, two things. One, the art of the Oni, so the style of the demons. In some panels, it ranged a bit, which I think was contextual. I think there was like a transformation, and it depended on what level of transformation you were at. So the main character, to go in a little bit of the plot. I think, generally we are covering, again, issues 1 to 10 to 15-ish, around that kind of way. So again, if you want zero spoilers for that, just jump in. We recommend it. If you're looking to dip your toe in manga especially, then this is a great place to start, I'd say, especially as a more modern title.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the style of the demons, you see it change a bit in the main character's sister, who very early on becomes a demon, but immediately, and this actually is reminiscent of Pokemon, there's a bit of they're a demon, but there's something different.
Yes.
And that's the running kind of hook, mystery hook. That's like, they're a demon, but they are retaining some of their humanity somehow, and that's almost never happened before.
And again, there's this kind of theme of the Chosen One that runs through manga.
Yes.
You see it in One Piece, you see it in Dragon Ball, you certainly see it in the Pokemon Adventures manga. And we're seeing that at play here, aren't we?
Yeah, I have some issues a bit more with that, which we'll get into. I think in good faith, but so the art of the demons, again, you see it in different ways. At its best, and by best I mean like when they're kind of going more full transformation, I found some of the panels genuinely creepy. It's a huge compliment to the art style. The biggest I could pay is it reminded me of Junji Ito, who in my eyes is even beyond manga across all illustration and art. I think he's one of the best at capturing creepy, creepy, especially black and white. So the fact that some of these parts reminded me of that, I was like, that's great.
Yeah.
Maybe he was an influence, because I think Ito's been going on for a while, so possibly an influence. The other style I liked was the mid-fighting, especially the water-based sword techniques, and the incorporating of the wave look and the water with the sword strikes.
I mean, the relationship between swordsmanship and water is deep.
Be like water, is that like a common, is that like a bastardized Western phrase?
That's a Bruce Lee thing, so that's more of a Chinese thing. But obviously Japan's all coastline, isn't it? Japan's a very small island, so it has a lot of coastline.
A lot of water.
And so there's this big relationship between samurai and the water. There's a famous story about a Ronin, who wrote the Book of Five Rings. His name escapes me now. Anybody who knows something about the samurai law will know about it. And he was going to a fight on a boat, and he didn't take his sword because he didn't want it to get rusty. And so he pulled up on this boat and beat the shit out of somebody with an oar.
Right. As you do.
As you fucking
that
do.
That does sound a bit in British coastline, kind of Cornwall kind of way.
Yeah. So he fought another swordsman who had a katana, and he killed him with an oar. And there's a whole school of swordsmanship now where they train with oars. And so their bokken, the wooden sword that you'll train with in kendo, this whole style of swordsmanship has a bokken that is in the shape of an oar, as opposed to being in the shape of a traditional bokken.
Right.
And that is directly related to that one guy.
Right.
And then there's this really intrinsic relationship between swordsman and fishing, because fishing for carp, obviously carp are really prominent in Japan, koi. It's where we get the Magikarp and the Gyarados from. They're directly related they're directly lifted from Japanese folklore. And fighting a very strong carp, a good koi can feel heavier on the line than it actually is because they're so strong. And that was seen as a great corollary for swordsmanship, like just the level of physical fitness that you'd need, and the way you'd need to be able to read the actions of a fish that you can't see was seen as a really useful training tool for a swordsman. And so that relationship between swordsmanship and the water, again, is very traditional.
And that's something that comes up quite a bit here, is physical training of the sword. So not just learning sword techniques, but literally like being strong and strong strikes, and this point in the story of being ready to open up a split open a boulder with your sword kind of thing. Yeah. And it's about like, if you're strong enough, you can learn and train to be strong enough to do this, and then you'll be ready. And
again, in Japanese swordsmanship, position of your blade is really more important than it would have been in Western swordsmanship. Because
Western swordsmanship, make the sword as big as possible and just swing it with all your might.
That, but also Western swords generally have two blades. A British or European longsword would have been sharpened on both sides.
Yeah, because you're just swinging it any which way.
Yeah,
and I'm guessing.
I mean, to be honest with you, having a sword sharpened on both sides is an ideal.
A sword sharpened.
Yes. We'll go Sean Connery for a while if you wish. Having your sword, having two edges on your blade is an ideal. There's a reason that that's not the case with Japanese swords.
Because you are disciplined to be putting all in one way.
Shit still.
Oh, okay.
So they had.
See, that's the opposite of what I thought the stereotype was.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting thing that curly steel, like figured Damascus steel, is seen as being superior. But the reason that Japanese swords make use of folded steel is because there was a high level of impurity in their steel. They didn't have great forging techniques. And they forged their blades in forges with really low heat, and they folded the steel to get some of those carbon impurities out. And so what you would have is a core of a very soft, high carbon steel, which in the West would have been deemed as super low quality steel. And then an outer core of lower carbon steel that's had all the folds put through it to fold the impurities out. The effect of that was that the sword was soft on the inside, rigid on the outside, and so it was quite good at taking quite heavy blows, and it wouldn't shatter. But it meant that you could only really forge a Japanese sword to have a live edge on one side. Whereas with Western steel that was much lower carbon and much stronger, you could forge a blade that didn't need to have such a profound spine, they call it. And so you could sharpen it on both sides. So again, as with all things, limitation is the mother of creation, right? And so this very, very direct and very accurate style of swordsmanship developed in Japan because they could only really get one edge on their blades. And so they needed to be very accurate with their sword. They needed to know what their blade position was going to be with every cut, because you can't just yeet it back and go in for a cut with the top of your blade. You always need to be really conscious of how you're moving with your sword. And this is a great fucking representation of Japanese swordsmanship.
But see, that's why I thought that I imagined Japanese being like, we're going to sharpen one side extensively, so you just got to be really careful and disciplined. And I imagine like British medieval, just like, just swinging it across your head like, I'll hit something eventually.
Well, it's interesting because there's kind of two veins in British, like West European medieval swordsmanship, isn't there? So there's two distinct skill sets that a medieval knight would need. One of them is that they were a tank.
Right.
Not everyone. Very few people.
Move slowly, highly protected.
Very few people on a medieval battlefield are armoured.
Yeah.
You were cutting through peasants with pikes. And so for that, yeah, just fucking swing, my G, and you're going to get through people. But then when a knight met another knight, then that shit becomes very intense. And there's a lot of half-swording. Half-swording is where you hold the blade with one hand midway through, and then angle your two hands and use it as a stabbing dagger. And then there's the death stroke, which is where you would hold the blade hold the sword by the blade, hit the fucker with the pommel. And that was the most effective way of killing another knight. And if you look at medieval treatises on sword fighting, they're often holding the sword by the blade and just swinging the fucking pommels at each other and using it as basically as a warhammer. Whereas Japanese swordsmanship is this very direct thing, and the techniques are very specific, and the way that you use the cuts and angle your body is all very specific and very, very specific. And then there's this kind of close guarded relationship that families would have with their family style that would be passed down that way. And one of the people I'm going to talk about in a little bit, Yagyu Munenori, had a style of swordsmanship that survives today in Japan. You can still go and learn it. And his style was very specific. And, you can kind of, even now, you can spot somebody who's using his style and be like, oh yeah, that's that.
And you said this was a good representation of specific sword techniques?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, even though they've kind of manga'd it.
Yeah, it's its own lore, world building version. But
just watching the position of that character model as they were using those cuts, I was like, yeah, that looks very familiar to me as Japanese swordsmanship.
Yeah. Speaking of the art again, I might have had this question when we did the Pokemon Adventures one, and that was so long ago. It seems I've probably completely forgotten. Yeah, I've probably completely forgotten if you had an answer and were able to answer this. Is the significance of the black and white is that all across all manga, and is there a reason?
Because they're printed cheaply,
right? Because they print them all in like volumes or chapters. Yeah,
exactly. And so manga will be printed on normal little paperback books, and it's printed on fairly pulpy paper because it's cheap. And so it's just a much more affordable way of getting it out there. And I suppose it's become a consistent style for them. Very rare that you see a manga colorized. And if you do, it's largely for a Western market.
See, that's one thing I was going to point about this specifically, but I guess this is for any violent manga, is there's definitely it feels like a stylistic choice when there's very violent, bloody scenes, but in black and white. Reminds me of The Walking Dead, the original back then. And you're looking at these scenes, and I think you're literally filling in some of the colors in your head, and that kind of makes you imagine it worse than it is, like that kind of effect.
Well, do you know that in Japanese and Chinese cartoons, they'll often take the colour out of the blood?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Which gives it a very weird, because they make it white. And so sometimes you'll just see a room that's got a dead person in it and it's covered with this milky white fluid, and you're like...
Someone went, that's better.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it going, that's infinitely worse.
Yeah.
Just like you've killed somebody and then you've spaffed on everything.
You see the South Park episode with Randy. The spooky ghost. Reminds me of that.
I know what will make this blood look less graphic. What if we make it all look like cum?
It's like the opposite of America, where they're like, violence, absolutely fine. Fill your boots with blood, literally. But a hint of nudity or sex, absolutely not. Banned.
Wildly
completely.
Inappropriate. Christians do not like nudity.
Whereas Japan, like, this blood's a bit much. Can we replace it with cum?
You know when you hear us have a conversation on the podcast as you're doing it, and you go, "That's going to end up as a fucking short, isn't it?"
I mean, I'm going to listen back to this while editing, and I'm going to have to make the choice: can I make a YouTube-friendly version of this or not? I mean, TikTok, I don't think they give a shit, but YouTube Shorts is kind of where we
can't get your tits out on TikTok anymore, though.
I missed that news somehow, but I'm just as saddened to hear it.
It was a while ago that you could. There was a whole genre of TikTok called the thirst trap.
I mean, that's been around since bloody Snapchat and Instagram, hasn't it?
Well, this is it. Yeah, absolutely. But it was prominent. There was a particular genre of them where somebody would be like sat on a chair and they would like throw a shoe in the air and kick it, and that would be the transition to them having their tits out.
Right. Well, I'm going to change the subject only because I don't want us to talk about this much that I have to list it as a topic in the description of the episode.
Jamie and Ryan talk about Demon Slayer and thirst traps.
Yeah.
While Jamie's getting like really high-minded about Japanese folklore and titties.
Yeah, we're appealing to the highbrow and the lowbrow.
Dude, they're the two sides of my personality that are always at war.
I think that's the definition of the podcast. We go highbrow with the literature and we go lowbrow with comics, and then on the really dark days we do hentai. Anyway,
we should definitely do some hentai just to know.
I don't think the literary value of hentai is up to snuff with what we are kind of aiming for.
Snuff is a really badly chosen term there.
Yeah, up to par, I should say.
So something that I really enjoy is when old art is just super fucking dirty. And I rediscovered an old blues artist that I love from a while ago, who everybody should listen to, and their name is Lucille Bogan.
I think I've heard this. It's like really explicitly dirty songs, isn't it?
Yeah.
From like the
30s. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, there's one of them called Shave 'Em Dry, and it's about how she wants somebody to fuck her so hard her pubes fall off.
Wow.
And you're like, that is impressive, love. Like, how did you, how in the deeply Christian South in the 1930s did that get recorded? Because it got recorded, Ryan.
She was the Northern Boys of her era. If you don't know the Northern Boys, look them up.
Look them up, yeah, 100%. If you have one takeaway from this episode, it's Lucille Bogan and the Northern Boys.
Oh, sure. I'll put a link in the episode.
Should we make a playlist? This is the playlist that you have to listen to when you read Demon Slayer.
They're like, I think I've got the wrong one. It's not the same at all.
It's just Jamie's chill playlist. It's got a lot of the Smiths on it.
I mean, that'd be better than the Northern Boys, especially. Back to the title, because as we have to wrangle it back in, I mentioned the Walking Dead comparison earlier, and another part, again, this might be completely coincidental, but the demon-like sister, specifically with it's not a muzzle, but it's like
Nozoku?
Is that like a horse thing? Because it looked like a horse shape kind of thing. But carrying her around, your demon friend / relative, remind me of specifically of Michonne from The Walking Dead.
Yes.
Which is like demon.
She has two zombies chained to it, doesn't she?
Two zombies, arms cut off and lower jaw cut off, so they literally cannot bite her and turn her. And by walking with her, she uses them as like a camouflage.
Yeah.
So other zombies like, Is that a human? No, it's like 3 zombies. It looks like from it. They get confused by she's like camouflage kind of.
That scene where she kills them both when she realizes she doesn't need them anymore. Really brutal, really cool. I love Michonne's character.
Yep, great in the comics and bastardized a bit in the live action.
Not seen the TV show.
You are glad you haven't.
I've read the comics. I've not watched the TV show.
Comics are goated.
The one thing that I found really funny is that I noticed the exact moment where the TV show started being produced in the comics. Like, as in, I was reading the comics and all of a sudden I was like, this is where the TV show started. I fucking bet it is. And it was when you met Isaac and his tiger. And I was like, I bet Robert Kirkman just wanted to write something in just to go, are you going to do it, guys? Are you actually going to put a tiger in there? And I hear they did, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. It's badly CGI'd.
I just thought that was a really fun move by Robert Kirkman. But I read it and I had that assumption. I was like, he's jumping his own shark here to see if they'll do it in the TV show. And then I did a bit of research and Robert Kirkman said exactly that. He was like, I just wanted to put something mental in there to see if they'd do it, and they did.
But it was a fun explanation because the character Isaac comes across like a king, and people think he's a king because he's got
and he just worked in the zoo, didn't he?
He was the lion tamer. Tiger feeder.
Yeah, he was like the keeper for the tiger, wasn't he?
Yes, exactly.
Back to Demon Slayer.
I thought you might enjoy the severed head with the arms growing out of it because it just reminded me of Geodude.
Yeah.
And that scene particularly, again, come back to dialogue. Another comparison between manga in general and superhero comics specifically is the lines of inner dialogue during like fight scenes and stuff.
Yeah, and you know what? It was more permissible here than I sometimes think it is in comics. And I don't know if it's just because I liked this better. Based
on how I feel about both, I would say it's probably because of liking one more than the other.
Yeah.
What I thought, from my side, and this is not like I don't think this is an objective take, this is my subjective. For me, because there was such extensive monologuing in the smallest actions, that for me kind of breached my suspense of disbelief.
Your suspension of disbelief.
There was literally like a blade coming down and the demon had like a full paragraph of thought as the blade was coming in. And for me, I was like, I don't think superhero comics that I've read have done that to that extent.
Yeah.
But alternatively, like superhero comics, they have mid-fights where they're having paragraphs and it's between punches. So it's similar.
But then if you've watched any amount of anime, and I've not watched a lot of anime, I've watched a little bit, but there'll be entire Dragon Ball Z episodes where somebody's charging up, right? There's like half a season of Dragon Ball Z where Gohan is just going...
Goku, yeah. No, he's doing like the sun thing, I think, isn't he? Like, feed your power or whatever it was. But yeah, no, it's very common. I've seen a lot in One Punch Man, the only other anime that I've probably seen. So we will definitely do One Punch Man.
Have you read One Punch Man?
No, but because we're going to do it for when season 3 finally comes out.
I get to read One Punch Man again. I fucking love One Punch Man.
But now...
Satoshi's great.
But even better... Lucky you get to read it with a superhero fan pointing out all the superhero tropes as we're going along.
It's a very knowing take, isn't it?
It's a parody and homage. Like it's a very good parody. Like the all-powerful Superman, essentially, who can be anyone. Like it plays for that trope so well.
But he got there by doing 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and running 10 kilometers a day.
And always being hot. Fell out. And always being hot as well. He always had the aircon on high and the windows closed.
He's such a funny chap, isn't he?
He's great. I mean, all the characters are great in that. But yeah, in the animes, there's a lot of dialogue in actions like that, and that seems like it's explicitly lifted directly from the original mangas.
But again, there's this real, like, in all the Japanese fiction that I've read, and then even in Kazuya Ishiguro, who is a British writer of Japanese descent. So his parents are Japanese, but he was raised in England. But I think at some point in his kind of literary diet, he got into Japanese fiction. And it's very much the case with Murakami, that there's this high level of introspection in the characters. And so you're often seeing not a lot of dialogue and a lot of introspection. And that's just kind of part of the character of Japanese literature. And so I suppose that follows through into his manga.
And I think, to be fair, that's all fair and good, because again, for me, for superhero ones, there's a lot of scenes where someone's flying through the sky, or like the Flash is running just anywhere and everywhere, and
the Flash is running, is he?
Yeah, the Flash runs sometimes.
Gotta go fast.
Gotta go fast. Have you tried running faster? That fixes it. We've basically just recreated one of our shorts. basically. But they will have these long introspective monologues
absolutely.
as well. So I think it's definitely a trope of manga and Western comics. But again, like specific action scenes, it's a bit different on each side, but similar problems, I'd say. But going through the pacing, something we've not talked about yet for this, but we normally do get into quite a bit in Western ones. What did you find the pacing? Because I've got some thoughts, but I want to hear, can you compare it to other mangas? Is it better or worse? Is it the same?
I thought it was relatively well paced. You are right. There are these moments of heavy introspection, and there are moments where quite a lot of dialogue takes place over actually quite a short period of time. But in terms of the way the story moves along, I felt like there wasn't any dead issues in the 15 that I read.
No, and my only qualm, and it's like a nitpicking one, I found some parts moved quite fast.
Yeah.
But it did still leave room for the more emotional beats. So those were prolonged and done in enough time to give it the emotional heft it needed.
Like, I really felt that we saw enough of his family pre-Nozoku getting Z'd up, for want of a better word.
Yes. But like the parts where the pacing goes a bit faster for me was like the point from discovering the family slaughtered to sister demon. Oh, we fought a bit. Oh, and now a demon hunter's found us, and now we've kind of resolved a bit. And then it slowed down for the realizing that the sister still had a bit of humanity in her. So it slowed down at the right time.
But what I think is really easy to overlook is the fact that between maybe issue 5 and issue 10, there are 2 panels where he skips a full year.
Yes. And
he's like, I was doing this for a year. And you're like, oh shit, you're now a teenage boy.
I had to reread that because what happened there was there's one part where he mentions, it took me a year and a half to this. I'm like, bloody hell, year and a half. And it's like, and then the sister, whose name I don't have in front of me, but then she fell into a coma for a year. And I was like, wait, what? It's like, hang on, is this a year on top of the year and a half we've just done? And then it turned out it wasn't. It was the year, it was the year of his training, she was in a coma. Oh no, he did half a year training, and then the other year was her in a coma, and then we're up to present. So,
I feel like in an American comic that would have been the entire run.
See, I just now had a thought. I think the difference is in Western comics, it will skip more time between panels. Yeah, but I think it relies more on trope kind of intuition where you like say it goes from night to day and you go, oh, it's the nighttime now, or then the seasons will change. You go, it's now later in the year. So I think Western comics do more of that, and even in between like things that happen over a day, I think it skips more between that with a more of an understanding from the reader, whereas this goes like almost in real time at parts.
And we've seen probably the best example of a heavily dilated timeline in 8 Billion Genies.
Yeah, I mean that was very explicit. Like,
yeah, but it was a really, really great use of that mechanism. Whereas I feel this was kind of like, and it took me a year to do this, and you're like, cool, but your character model hasn't changed.
And then it does a few panels later.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you're kind of like, oh, well, this is just a bit jarring. Like, I hear you there.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that as pacing. I thought of it as storytelling, but you are right. It is an element of pacing, isn't it? It's the way that story's paced.
Yeah, and it could be a bit of both. And again, this could be, why I'm hesitant to criticize it is because it could be a trope of the genre rather than of this specific title.
And I feel like manga does love a long training montage. Like, there's a whole bunch of Dragon Ball where Goku's just kind of learning his powers, right? Like Goku with a tail.
There was, and then later one, the one I remember from my after school watching days was he was he was traveling in a ship to Piccolo's home planet, and he was training in heavy gravity. Yeah. So it was like, to get there, it's going to take like a year for you to get there because everyone else is already there. But you can train along the way and change the gravity. So he trained under heavy gravity. So there's this story going along on the planet, and then it cuts to Goku just like doing like the lightest weights, but the gravity's really strong. It's going to help me. And a bit of exposition. But the dialogue in terms of explaining the time jumps. Yeah, there was one part I noted specifically as more of an example of the literal translation of the original Japanese text.
Oh, right, okay.
So sometimes I'll go, I have to note this line down. Yeah. Just to see if you like picked up on it as well. So, and again, you mentioned what it was regarding. The line specifically was, he's talking about his training, he goes, it took me a year to develop this or whatever. And then in the middle of that, it goes, also, Nezuko has lost consciousness for almost a year and a half. And it's just so like, because he's writing a diary at that point. Yeah. So it almost feels like as if it kind of feels like if he was writing a letter to someone and you're reading this letter from him, you're like, training's taking me a year. So bloody hell, that's long. Also, my sister's been in a coma for a year and a half. Wait, what?
It's the first time you've mentioned it, Sonny.
Have I missed a part?
Like, who in the world would you care enough to give that information to, but not care enough about to give that information a year and a half late?
Exactly. And even if you're just getting the one letter a year and a half later, you might be like, maybe start with that. I am sad because my sister has fallen into a coma.
It would be the title of the letter, wouldn't it?
It's especially sad because it's been a year and a half. This is someone who had a limited word count. They were like, they were trying to get a tweet out. It's like, I got to condense this.
Did you notice something as well about the setting, the setting within time?
The setting is in the time period.
When it's set, yeah. When do you think it's set?
So I mean, I do not have the relevant information to make a proper guess, but it feels like that. It kind of feels like feudal Japan, kind of farming and small villages kind of era.
Between 1912 and 1926.
Wow. So is that it's directly from the comic, from the manga? Right.
So, you know when he's fighting that big Oni that's eaten 14 kids in the wisteria patch?
Yeah.
He asks it, what era are we in? And he says, is it the Meiji era? And the protagonist says, no, it's the Taisho era.
Right.
So that relates, the eras in Japan are very strict because they go off who the emperor was. The Taisho era in Japan is the interwar years, so it's, well, not quite interwar because it's a tiny bit pre-war and then mostly interwar. So Taisho was the emperor between 1912 and 1926. So this is set in the early 20th century,
right? And
you kind of don't get that vibe from it, do you? As you correctly identified, it feels feudal, and it's not.
And I think the reason we, or me specifically, and a lot of audience would have that is just not having the relevant knowledge of this different culture. So like when it's, if it's England or America, we could be like, oh, it's medieval times, or, that kind of, we could
no, it looked feudal to me as well.
Yeah, but I'm pulling that word of like my very limited, like searching my brain, like feudal, is that a thing? Like I threw that out there because I was confident you would correct me if it was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, he's wearing a very specific type of kimono, which is the precursor to a gi. Can't remember the exact name of it now, and I wish I could, but it's like the same kind of kimono that an Aikido practitioner or a Kendo practitioner would wear.
Right.
So the big coarse black cotton gi. And that is not that by the Taisho era, certainly that would have not been the way that an everyday Japanese person would have been dressing. That is traditional, like feudal era, maybe kind of mid Meiji era attire. By the Taisho era, Japan was modernizing heavily. And so, you just wouldn't expect to see somebody in that kind of kimono in the Taisho era. And so they're really relying on the iconography of feudal Japan, but then they're very specifically stated, it's the Taisho era. Like those words come out of the protagonist's mouth. And you're like, well, that just doesn't sit right. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I mean, it goes without saying, I did not pick up on this at all. I did recognize the eras as just being like I inferred it was just an establishing like time. Like it was, I took it more for the context of
how long has that monster been asleep
this
for?
monster has been here for X amount of years, and these eras define it. So I was like, yeah, I'm cool with that. But now that you've mentioned the time setting, it actually puts into context one of my criticisms, or like criticisms of a very small specific era. So there's the part where this mysterious child appears and is suddenly teaching the main character how to get even better, because the teacher has basically said, I've taught you everything, you need to build upon your own skills now. And then he can't, and then the ghost turns up. It's like, I'll actually help you. So is there can I say this little bit, and then if you've got the extra lore?
Thing.
Yes.
That's the whole thing.
All I noticed was, and I think you must have noticed this as well, but the language this ghost child uses of basically saying like, oh, you're trying to be a man, or you should, to move forward, you need to be more of a man, like, why aren't you being a man, that kind of thing. So not realizing that the time setting, I thought that's a bit odd, just intuitively thinking it was the present. I was like, that's a bit like old-fashioned, like gender norms kind of stuff. And now that you've placed the time saying, I go, oh, that makes 100% sense now, because that's exactly how people would talk at that time.
So the two people who teach him, they are wearing the masks of two very particular figures from Japanese folklore.
Boxers?
or Kitsune, the fox,
right,
and the first one is the Tengu. So you know the one with the cock nose?
Yes, I recognize that from Sekiro, one of the From Software games.
Yeah, so the Tengu is a very specific type of yokai, which evolved a lot during the feudal period and then again in the Meiji period. So it was really, really popular in the Meiji period. But very, very, very popular in the feudal period. So Tengu originally were these like bird people. They were deeply inhuman. They were generally a malevolent force. But then the cult of the Tengu evolved a bit through time, and you get this more human Tengu with the big nose and the red face. And they are a really interesting figure in Japanese folklore because of their relation with martial ability. And so there are some samurai who claim to have been taught their skills by Tengu. And if you look at early samurai treatises, Yagyu Minonori's The Life-Giving Sword is a really great example. The illustrations that they use to show the techniques, the sparring partner was a Tengu. So it's a red-faced humanoid with bird legs and big wings on its back. Really kind of weirdly, a lot of the visual cues for the Aarakocra in D&D come from that second type of Tengu, like Daegu Tengu, they call them. And then Tengu in D&D lore are little distended bird people, and they're always evil.
I literally fought them in Sekiro, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
But the Tengu in Japanese folklore, it kind of, so they were great they were known for their martial abilities, they were great swordsmen, but they were also kind of these rebellious kind of libertine figures. And so they would often go against the government or the empire and the emperor and what they wanted. They were kind of these rebellious figures who would take wayward swordsmen and teach them how to defend the weak. And so the fact that the first guy who taught him his martial ability was wearing a Tengu mask is very relevant.
Do you think that's going to be entrenched in the whole Demon Slayer, like, back world building and backstory?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the Tengu is a kind of Oni. They're a kind of Oni. They're a kind of yokai that then come to become kind of more chill with the humans.
So you think there might be an element, maybe later revealed, of like it takes a demon to beat a demon kind of thing? Which is not, again, is quite common in these kind of tropes.
But then the fact that the spirit ghost, the force ghost, shall we call it? Just so we can use some of our own parlance, was a kitsune, a fox, is really telling. So the fox in Japanese folklore is very, very different to the Western fox. So kitsune tended to have the ability to possess humans. And so there's this really famous story from Japanese folklore where this little girl becomes possessed by a kitsune. And she basically says, look, I've got cubs in the den, I need food. And they give the girl the food and she eats it all. And the fox is like, no, the girl doesn't get the food. My cubs get the food. And so they wrap up a bunch of rice cakes, put them in the pocket of her kimono. She fucks off and comes back without the rice cakes, and then she's no longer possessed. And so there's a lot of stories of kitsune possessing people. And so while the Tengu has this very, very physical, martial connotation, the kitsune is more kind of about magic and control and the mind. And so the fact that the one with the Tengu mask taught him how to fight, and then the one with the kitsune mask actually told him how to have control over that power, that's very relevant. And that's really firmly entrenched in that kind of world. And then again, the specific kind of technique that the kitsune teaches him is really, really heavily related to Zen Buddhism.
Right. And
the point at which Zen Buddhism and swordsmanship cross over. So there was a chap called Takwon Soho, who was a renegade Zen master.
Sounds like a Wu-Tang Clan.
Fucking A. He was a pretty cool dude. You can still read his book, The Life-Giving Sword by Yagyu Minonori, Hagakure, and then Takwon Soho's work were all kind of related. Takwon Soho was a Zen Buddhist who was basically kicked out of his temple. So he fucked off and lived in the mountains. And one of the things he would do is invite swordsmen up to meet him, and they would hold discourse with him. thing that he taught them was to have no abiding place. So he taught them the Zen Buddhist technique of not allowing your mind to stay in the same place for very long. Basically meditation.
Mm-hmm.
What we would now understand as transcendental meditation.
We would understand for sure, yeah.
Yeah. We've all done TM.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we've all had that fucking meditation app that tries to teach us how to meditate. We all know about the monkey mind.
Yeah, I routinely achieve nirvana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
And so the idea of not having an abiding place in your mind and never allowing your mind to be still, but always to be fluid when you're meditating, became a really, really powerful practice in swordsmanship because it allowed the swordsman to have this very fluid mind where they were never becoming too fixated on, say, the body position of their opponent because they were always looking to exploit that next weakness and to cover up their own next weakness. And that is one of the things that the protagonist talks about. He's like, he had a different verbiage for it, and I think that might be down to just the fact that where I learnt this stuff from, I was reading an academic translation and we're reading a comic book translation, and it's two different translators translating the same concept, but it was recognizably that concept of not having an abiding place, which is what the protagonist was learning there. And so you've got the Tengu teaching him swordplay, but then this kind of spiritual projection. And again, there's this idea of the yokai not as a physical embodiment of anything, but as a malicious force that exists. And so some of the yokai stories will just be like, there is just a presence in your house that's fucking stuff up.
So the Japanese version of like a poltergeist.
Yeah, 100%. But it's kind of, a poltergeist implies something that was dead, that was living and is now dead and is malevolent for that reason. Whereas this is just kind of, it's almost like a force of nature.
Yeah. Demon being an ethereal thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the idea of like this spectral projection of a person in a kitsune mask teaching him the Zen Buddhist principle of not having an abiding place and relating that to swordsmanship. As soon as I read that, like all of these, 13th to 15th century Zen Buddhist treatises I was reading as a teenager, weird fucking kid, man.
And adult.
Yeah, like, oh, dude, into some weird shit. All of that stuff that I've kind of read and absorbed came back to me, and I was like, wow, this is that set of theory, that set of ideas represented in comic books. And that was kind of dope. That was pretty fresh.
So 3 things I've said on the back of that.
Sorry.
One is I think I can officially now give you status of official weeb. Maybe there'll be a sound effect or something here, but I don't know.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
I was thinking more of like a Japanese video game, like when you get a coin and you hear like the school tune, like way, like that kind of thing. I'll see if I can find it. If not, it'll be something generic. Another thing is I think we might have to record and put a bit at the beginning where it goes, so Jamie's about to speak some Japanese. He does actually know his shit. So it's not naive, like Westerner. Yeah.
For reference, for the listener, just so you know that I did come upon this knowledge honestly, I'm a second dan black belt in karate. I did karate from the age of 6. I was a national champion in karate. I taught karate for a long time. And so I was reading books about Zen Buddhism and Japanese swordsmanship to kind of further inform my practice as a martial artist, which is why I know this shit.
Yeah.
I'm not actually a weeb. I had a professional reason to know this stuff.
And what I might do is isolate that part and put it right at the beginning and go, this is why he says the stuff right at the top of the episode.
This is why Jamie just goes off on one about 15th century samurai in this one.
I was saying, no, specifically the speaking Japanese right at the start.
Right,
like
yeah,
that.
the really offensive bad Japanese.
Exactly, but if I put that at the beginning, if I put this right now in the beginning, then people might be like, I'm now prepared for him to speak actual Japanese.
Do you know about like and this is completely off topic, but it's fun. There's this thing that happened in Japanese where because they adopted Western culture post World War II, there was all this stuff that was coming in Japan that they didn't have words for. And so they made a new kind of, almost a whole new vein in Japanese language called gaijin, which is their name for foreigner. And it's loan words from other languages that they've just kind of adapted to sound right in their language. So I'd like you to guess what a hamburger is in Japanese.
It is a very literal, it's just sort of like,
hamburgeru.
Yeah.
That's that. If you go into a McDonald's in Japan and go hamburgeru, they'll just give you a hamburger.
And that's the equivalent of like us as Westerners taking like foreign name things, and we keep it the same, but we bastardize it to our own versions.
We anglicize it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Or Franco-size it or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The third point was actually bringing it back to the title again. So the point I made a note of specifically, you talking about how he was learning this extra level of the sword fighting and everything.
Yeah.
This is a little bit where my suspension of disbelief was less suspended, if that makes sense. So again, I know this specifically. So Tanjiro, I'm going to attempt to pronounce, becomes good at sword fighting because he can smell the lines of interval and then sees the lines to connect his blade to.
So, yeah, when he's talking about the lines of interval, that's the stuff I'm talking about.
Right.
So what he's developed, because he says, he very specifically says, I don't let my brain stop in a certain place so that I can smell the lines of interval. And so they're kind of rolling that all in with this character feature that he has this weird sense of smell. But actually what is happening there is something that anybody who has any level of knowledge about Japanese swordsmanship, certainly early Japanese swordsmanship, would go, oh, fuck, I know that. I recognize that. Like a kendo practitioner or an aikido practitioner who's familiar with the shit that I was reading when I was younger would go, oh, yeah, that's Taekwondo Soho. That's what that is.
But so with this text in this world specifically, it's the smelling part that made me go, what?
I can smell where my sword needs to go.
And this is coming from someone who's like, Superman can fly, Batman's a genius, bloody
the cosmic treadmill makes perfect sense.
Exactly. There's a giant penny in the Batcave. Like that's all fine by me. Smelling your sword movements is where I went, wait, what?
Do you know what? Even I was a little bit baffled by that element of it. But again, I think because I had all that extra context, I was like, yeah, this kind of makes sense. Like, I get it. I see
even the smelling aspect?
Well, yeah, but they were kind of connecting it to a sense, and they were connecting it to something that we already know about that character.
Yeah.
And then further down the line, it becomes a big deal for him because he uses... I don't know if you got there, but he's fighting two Oni who can disappear under the floor. So he can't see them, but he can smell them, so he knows where to put his sword through the floor to get them.
That is the one saving grace of this part that I've highlighted, is they do slowly build the sense of smell being intrinsic to this whole demon slaying thing. So if it just came out of nowhere, I would have judged it as bad. Like if it was just this by itself, I would have been like, that's ridiculous and isolated and doesn't make sense. But they are building this sense of smell and specifically, you mentioned earlier the trope of the chosen one. This kid has such a strong sense of smell, and that makes him a great demon slayer because in this world, those things are linked. So that was the one thing I was like, I will forgive it on that because they are actually building this thing.
And we're dealing with a type of Oni, which again is very traditional, but they're shapeshifters.
See, smelling monsters, I was on board for that. Like that's
smelling your sword,
smelling where the lines where your sword should go. I was like, oh, you've leapt a bit forward for me. I'm still with you, but I'm trailing behind a little bit on that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas, what's his name? The one who's a lawyer.
Daredevil.
Whereas Daredevil's echolocation, totally okay, baby.
Yeah, bats do it, so it's fine.
Oh yeah, because no animals smell their prey. None at all.
Again, smelling monsters, that's fine. There's no animals that can smell where their claws should go in a fight. As far as I know. I might be wrong about that.
Oh, mate, I'm going to do the research. Next episode, I'm going to be like, right.
the
honey badgers.
The test will be, right, for a YouTube exclusive video, we're going to blindfold you, we're going to put noise-cancelling headphones over your ears, and you're going to smell your way around the flat.
I mean, in fairness, mate, my flat is quite an olfactory experience, so...
True. We'll get you somewhere outside and we'll see if it works.
I'm a grubby comic book nerd in his 30s. What do you think this place smells like?
And only recently the comic book aspect. Only recently justified. The one last trope that I made a note of.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I went off on one, didn't I?
That's the point of the podcast.
It's kind of what I'm here for, isn't it? Yeah.
The one last trope that I enjoyed, and this is a smaller part, I just liked this trope kind of going across mediums and genres, was the hardened, stoic to a fault mentor becoming emotionally attached to the child they're mentoring.
Yes.
And I thought, I was trying to think again of the tropes they reminded me of. There's probably lots in manga. I think there's lots of like Dragon Ball and One Punch Man and stuff. Remind me of Daredevil because his mentor Stick There's a relationship with them where he's like, I'm training you to be a soldier for a war of the secret war is happening, and I don't care if you die. And then later it's like, you're too soft for the war, so get out of here. But it's because he cares about him.
I suppose. I mean, there's almost an opposite thing that happens a bit in manga, where you've got this highly skilled, highly proficient master who's a bit silly. Because they've reached that point of enlightenment where they've realized that they don't need to be serious. Like Master Roshi is.
I was literally about to say him. Yeah,
Master Roshi's a bit silly because he's reached a really elevated sense of enlightenment.
The Western version, Yoda.
Yeah, well, fucking A. And isn't Yoda really? I mean, aren't the Jedi really firmly rooted in samurai traditions?
Yep, definitely.
Like, this kind of ancient school of swordsmanship that protects the leaders.
And there's a bit later about the colours of the swords becoming a big thing.
Yeah.
So I thought when I was trying to think of tropes of like the emotionally distant but actually cares a lot mentor, I went straight to Scrubs and Dr. Cox.
And to a certain extent, Master Splinter.
I think he was never.
He was always a caring patriarch, wasn't he?
I think some versions maybe have him more cold than others and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the core text is always he's the dad, and he's
very warm.
Yeah, he's always like he always refers to us as his sons. Whereas this, I think it feeds into that trope of if it's a dangerous world, then someone's taking someone on to mentor them. But with this back of the head thought of they're probably going to die soon, so I'm not going to like get attached.
I mean,
and then it just grows naturally.
The relationship between the protagonist and that young girl in The Last of Us kind of has an element of that, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. And that's because he's distancing her because he had a daughter her age who died. So he's like, I'm trying not to replace my dead daughter. And then obviously it just, again, happens naturally.
And then again, we see a very Japanese depiction of death in it, where death is a part of life and the dead are still very much present, which is a big deal in Japan. They have a very different relationship with death than we do in the West.
I mean, the West has said everyone just becomes poltergeists.
Yeah, fucking A. But no, that idea that like he freed the spirits of the kids and they were free to be spirits and they became, it's a thing in pantheism where when you have a religion that's really intrinsically linked to the land and the lore of that land, your dead become part of that.
Yeah.
Whereas we've kind of lost that because of our monotheistic religion, and so our dead now go to a higher power is the general kind of conversation we have about them. We tell children that grandma's gone to heaven as opposed to grandma is in the woods protecting us.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And the one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, but you remind me of, was some panels having like humorous, funny depictions and drawings. That, I imagine, is a common trope in manga generally as well.
Oh, very much so. Manga's funny.
Yeah. Well, the only one I try to think, I could only think of one that I think explicitly is not, and that is something like I tried to Google the anime with motorcycles. It took me to an article with 20 best animes with motorcycles. I know it's number one, so I just have to. What I was thinking of was Akira.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So Akira was the only one I could think of was explicitly serious all the time.
But Akira is particularly serious.
Yeah. So we've established that the norm manga tone is serious at parts, but also then just have a random panel where someone's got a funny face and it's a bit humorous.
There's these moments of levity, and again, those faces, that like single eye pulled down thing? That's just, like a feature of Japanese communication, isn't it?
I feel like with this manga specifically, the tone is a bit all over the place because of that inclusion when it didn't need it. Whereas something like a Dragon Ball Z started off with quite a lot of levity, but then it built up into these serious points that it earned through long character arcs and stuff.
Dragon Ball Z is an interesting one because Dragon Ball was a Shojin Jump comic. Dragon Ball Z was pretty much exclusively made to be exported to the West.
Right.
Dragon Ball Z was made to be an export that was going to be sent over to America to be put on Cartoon Network. And so I think that's why Dragon Ball Z is kind of always the one that's mentioned by people who don't like manga and anime, being like, well, Dragon Ball Z's dumb. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the actual vibe.
But that definitely explains the differences in the two versions or the...
Yeah, because Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z are completely tonally different. I feel like Dragon Ball is a bit closer to this, really.
But again, with this, I felt like when you're starting off with kid's family getting slaughtered and then having to rescue his sister who's a demon,
fairly heavy.
I thought the tone was right, like right on the mark, up until it then started to get a bit like funny or attempting funny at points after, and then I felt like, am I reading the same thing? Like there's a bit where he tries to find a basket for a sister, and the basket's too small, and she gets in it halfway. It's like, this isn't going to work.
He's like, can you shrink?
But then it leads into demons can alter size, and it was a thing established before and reaffirmed in this part. So it still served a purpose, but I felt like the humorous aspect of it was a bit weird for the tone.
Yeah, 100%. I feel as though because of the point that we've both read up to, we're not seeing all the richness. Because this is like in its 150th chapter or something.
Of course, yeah.
I read like 10% of this, and I'm making some we're both making some pretty sweeping statements about it tonally.
Yeah, I feel like for listeners of this episode, either you've read no manga and you're getting like a similar person's opinion of what you also might think getting into it, or you're someone who is very experienced manga reader, and you are seeing the other side of people who don't know it. So I feel like we are giving a unique perspective of, what it's like to start reading this kind of thing.
I imagine there's not that many Westerners who know as much about folklore as I've been able to pull together for this. So I'm hoping that even if you are a manga fan, my observations about this particular title in relation to like the Japanese folklore tradition and the yokai has been useful.
Unless you're one of those neckbeards with the waifu pillow, that might be the one level that might know more than you.
Yeah, like if you're somebody who gets your rocks off to an oni, then you probably know more than me. But
But I think to sum up, I would say, like, again, what you said, it feels in a very positive way like there's a lot of potential for where the story can go.
Mate, I'm really excited to finish reading it.
And I know I equated it to Something's Killing the Children because of very obvious monster hunting, saving people. But again, with that was also slowly building a world behind the scenes of the normal world, and there's going to be a lot of more stories and exploration of that world, and it feels like potentially a lot to continue.
Because something that you're not familiar with yet is that there is an introduction of a BBAG.
A big bad guy, yes.
Big bad evil guy.
Yes.
Did you get to Tokyo?
Don't think, no. So I got to, he first got into this big village. It's his first mission post the final test or whatever. Yeah. So, and he just had that only disappearing into the walls and the floors.
Yeah, so he kills them. And then he heads to Tokyo to go and fight another Oni. And there is a guy, the kind of oldest Oni, who is known to be a shapeshifter and who is the only person who can infect humans. So they think he's the only person who can cure a human. And he goes to Tokyo and he sees him with his human family. He's dressed like Michael Jackson for some reason. He's in like a white suit with a white trilby hat over his eyes. Honestly, the first thing I thought was, why the fuck is Michael Jackson here? And he meets him and he kind of realizes that this BBEG that he needs to find and fight and extract information from has a human family.
Right.
Who don't know that he's an Oni. And so that's really interesting. And there's a level of intrigue that's coming in. So I feel like at issue 15, I was just starting to lift the skirt a little bit on the main story.
Yeah.
Which the context you didn't really get. And so I kind of got a glimpse of the richness of the world because I saw early 20th century Tokyo depicted and it looked sick. It looked really cool. So yeah, I think there's so much more here that we've not been able to talk about.
Yeah.
But I mean, I really feel like from 10 to 15 issues, that's more than we would normally give something.
Yeah, and on that like limited experience, I would definitely say it's a good read and it's worth reading more. And this for me is going to add to a list of after I've finished catching up on comic books from last year. So once I've caught up on the superhero era, this will be one of those ones like, all right, I'm in between issues and I can get some more into this and, explore a bit more. And potentially one day, maybe on the Barely Literate, the behind paywall thing, we might do a viewing of the movie that was so successful and give our thoughts on that and see how, as anime, how that stands up.
100%. I'd love to talk about the whole story at some point because I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
we'll add it to the ever-growing list of, we should do more on this.
Yeah, we should finish this one and talk about it again.
And the difference is it won't be me reading the rest of a Spider-Man run and coming back going, right, this is how they fucked it up.
It'll be me being like, guess what?
Yeah.
Because there's one more genre of Oni that I just want to talk about that I didn't get to talk about, which is reanimated household objects. That's a thing.
Yeah.
And so you're just like, there's stories of people being attacked by like frying pans with manga faces and shit. And we haven't seen any of that yet, but they are a type of Oni, specifically Oni as well. And so like, I really love the idea that we'll be 50 issues in and he's just like fighting a broomstick or something.
I'm looking forward to it.
It just sounds like a fun time to me. So Ryan, a thing happened recently.
A thing that is quite integral to the subject of the podcast that we're doing right now.
Fucking Eisner Awards.
Eisner Awards at Comic-Con, which...
Is it normally at Comic-Con?
It's apparently always a Comic-Con, and what's interesting for me, and I think for us as well, and the listeners, is Comic-Con seems to be going back towards the direction of just being for comics.
Yeah, instead of just being a place for content creators to shill their stuff.
Well, by content creators, I mean like Disney and Marvel and DC, Warner Brothers. I hope it goes that way, because it'd be cool if maybe one day, if it's less popular for people needing to see like, oh my god, bloody Ant-Man 22, we get to see 10 seconds of it before it gets CGI'd. If it goes back to comics, then that could be something that we could trek out to and be like,
oh, it'd be great.
Comic Literate coming to Comic-Con.
I mean, we'd definitely do either Manchester or London, I think.
I mean, we'd have to start off there and work our way up.
So if you could all just send an email.
Just chip in £1 each and
we should all just send a Comic-Con and be like, send an email to the Comic-Con people. I don't know who they are.
Comic Literate deserve a booth.
Yeah. Just be like, there's this rad podcast called the Comic Literate Podcast, and we want a face reveal, so you have to let them do a live recording.
Exactly. And we'll go on with masks, and then we pull them off on stage, and I will reveal my second mask under my first mask.
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly.
So did any of our favourites get the nod?
Yes, they did. So ones we've done before, I thought was a great one. Best New Series was won by... I'm not going to do that every time. If you can hear that on the mics, it's a drum roll. It was Public Domain.
Oh, what a great one.
Yeah, by Chip Zdarsky. And I honestly... For a comic I enjoyed, and we said it was good, so we have great taste. But I didn't think it would win. I didn't think it'd be the best new series.
Well, it's a fun one for the comic book industry as a whole to highlight, because it's deeply critical of everything that they do.
That is true, yes. Another interesting one, best publication for teens, which they class as 13 to 17. The winner was Do a Powerbomb. Now, I would argue...
That's interesting.
I would argue that something being good for teens, it's good for adults as well. Like, it's close enough.
Yeah, John Green, you know the author.
I've heard of him through you, yes.
Yeah, he maintains that young adult fiction is just fiction that people actually read.
See, I've also heard apparently the editing and, like, screening for, like, grammatical errors and spelling mistakes, apparently that's less in young adults' fiction.
Oh no, it's pretty fastidious wherever you go, I think.
But, well, I heard that apparently it's worse in young adult. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it's something that it made sense to me, because I think people just thought, oh, it's about vampires kissing each other, so it'll be successful no matter what. Whereas if you try and release, like, Great Gatsby 2 or something.
Oh, God, no. Oh, no, it hurts.
He's back for revenge.
Oh, no, don't.
He's back to kick some ass.
Jay Gatz as a cyborg.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I thought young persons, I was like, that's fine. Heartstopper, that's like a critically acclaimed one. That was nominated. So
I think the interesting thing about Do a Powerbomb is that it would have been accessible for teenagers. But there's this really lovely undercurrent story about parenthood.
Yeah.
That I think would be missed by most teenagers. And actually, there's something really valuable for adults in there.
And this is what I mean. I think if it's good for teenagers, it's not like a kid's book. It's not like burst reading level kind of thing. Like, I think it'd be good for adults as well. It just seems like a bit of an arbitrary, like, let's get another award in there.
I think that's because they acknowledge that pro wrestling is a pretty juvenile interest.
I mean, as a pro wrestling fan, I agree. Like,
that was the joke.
That's what we are. I'm fully on board. Best writer... Interestingly enough, someone we've done 2 titles from, and that
is Alan Moore.
You haven't written anything, but we wanted to give you his award anyway. No,
just to get him there,
It was James Tynan the Fourth. So House of Something's Killing the Children and Nice House on the Lake.
Oh, which one did he get it for?
But also just best writer. So he's just over the
fully
year.
deserves it.
So these are all the things that have contributed over the year to the best writer status. House of Slaughter, which is a Something's Killing the Children spin-off. Wind, which is a Boom thing. Sandman Universe, Nightmare Country. So within the Sandman Universe, started by Neil Gaiman, a thing there. Title called The Closet and title called Department of Truth. So apparently they're all really good stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, we thoroughly enjoyed both of the things that we read by him, didn't we?
And
so congratulations to you, sir. It's thoroughly deserved. We love your work.
And what is great about those is that the writing was so unique in them, and they, especially the such different art styles, made them feel like very unique titles in themselves.
Yeah.
But you could tell there was that character development in both the introspective House Lockdown and the big Monsters Are Real kind of title.
Yeah, no, they were both great, weren't they? They were both really good.
Now, one thing is interesting. There's an award here for best lettering.
Nice.
I don't know enough about lettering, like, part of the process.
So, I have a friend who is a professional typesetter.
Right.
And you know the way that I feel about superhero shenanigans?
Mm-hmm.
That is the way that he feels about bad kerning.
All right. And obviously I know, but for the listeners, what is kerning?
Kerning is where two letters can kind of sit underneath or on top of each other a little bit comfortably. And so you push them together just a little bit so they sit on the page better.
Right.
Once you know what kerning is and you know what good kerning looks like, you will notice bad kerning wherever you see it. So my advice to anybody would be don't look into kerning.
Right.
So yeah, no, typesetting is still very much a thing. And so it kind of makes sense. When you say typography, though, what was the exact award for?
Lettering.
Lettering. So, see, part of me thinks that actually these days you would just take a type font, you take a font and use it.
So this is what I mean is I think I had a naively lower assumption of what lettering involved.
Who won the Eisner for best lettering?
Hang on, let me just get back to that. Best lettering was Stan Sakai for writing Usagi Yojimbo.
Is that
I don't know.
manga?
It's from IDW, so who do Turtles. So
fuck.
I don't. It might be. It sounds like it might be manga inspired potentially.
So if anybody,
and another one actually. Best coloring, Geordie Belair, who did Nice House on the Lake, apparently.
Yeah, well, doesn't that just make sense?
Yeah, no, that was great coloring.
His sense of color is fucking astonishing. Congratulations to you.
I actually don't know if Geordie's a man or woman or in between, so let's say they did a really good job.
No, well, they did a fantastic job on Nice House on the Lake. And one of the things that you and I kept complimenting on it was the use of color in storytelling.
Great watercolor effect.
Yeah, so what was their name again?
Geordie Belair, I think.
Geordie Belair, congratulations to you.
Yeah.
Fucking thoroughly deserved. Love your work.
And then a couple of mentions on the ones we haven't done.
Did John
but
Ramirez Jr. get anything?
I don't see him mentioned, and that's all we'll say. Best short story, apparently it was a title called Finding Batman, written by Kevin Conroy and a J. Bone.
Do we know Kevin Conroy?
Kevin Conroy is the famous voice of Batman who passed away, and apparently it's to do with DC Pride 2022. So it might, I suspect, it might be about Kevin Conroy's experience voicing Batman. So that could be an interesting one to do.
Cool. We should read that.
Yeah. Best single issue one shot, Batman One Bad Day, The Riddler, written by Tom King by name, King by nature, because he's the king of comic book writers, and a Mitch Gerrards. Best continuing series, Nightwing. Now, I tried Nightwing.
Not good.
Everyone's raving about it, and it wasn't quite up to par for me.
Nightwing's Robin, isn't he?
He was a Robin, yes.
Yeah. A Robin.
I think we might have to...
He was a Robin.
He was the first Robin, so yeah. We might have to do that one at some point, because I'd be fascinated to get your take on it, because it's won a bloody Eisner Award, so maybe I'm missing something that you might get from it.
I might see in it, yeah.
And best limited series is one we are absolutely going to do, The Human Target by Tom King by name, King by nature.
Fucking love Tom King, don't you?
Tom King, I think, might be the best, superhero comic book writer for the main two.
We know that he's not, though.
No, the best comic book writer is Robert Kirkman for Invincible.
No. The best comic book writer
superhero comic book writer.
The best superhero comic writer is whoever wrote the most recent Blue Beetle run.
I mean, I might have to debate you on that one, but
we both know who it is.
yes. And we said his name at some point. I'll cut it in later.
Are you going to ADR it in?
I'll probably ADR it in, yeah.
Nice.
But so, yeah. Eisner Award, I think we're definitely going to keep on point of this for years to come. I think that'd be a good thing. This is like the Oscars of the comics, essentially.
Yeah.
So, and I think some great picks here, and ones that I certainly have used previous Eisner Awards as like a let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like somebody's killing children one.
And one of the things that we look for is Eisner winners. It's one of the when we're looking for something really great, we look at what's won an Eisner and what hasn't, you know?
Exactly. So this will influence our going forward, and hopefully one day we'll be there to present an award for best lettering. And we'll start the speech with, we started a podcast, we didn't know what lettering actually was.
I think there needs to be, and maybe we would need to sponsor it, but the comic literate Eisner for best panel layout.
Yeah, we could start that. Yeah, that'd be a difficult one to judge, because I think we've only just recently got to the point of good and bad.
Yeah,
getting to like best would be, right, I think, another level of like review and
best panel layout of any comic that we've read.
I think for me, it's one I don't think we haven't done yet. It probably would be Human Target for me.
Yeah, I mean, I like what they did with Old Man Logan.
Yeah, that was a really good one.
Where they had the DNA strand and there was 2 fight scenes happening either side of it.
That, I don't think that wasn't in Old Man. That was in Old Man Logan, the following series.
Yeah, but you know the one I mean.
Yeah. That was a great, unique use of the timelines and of panels. I think we'd have to have a real thought. I mean, we're going to do an end of year wrap up best of, so we are going to. That could be one
of our awards.
We are going to have to decide. So we're going to have to literally go back through all the other titles that we said were good, and then look at them comparatively. Go, which of these that we read was the best layout? I think Nice House on the Lake could be a strong contender.
Yeah, that was cool. That was fun. I remember being quite impressed by Supergirl.
Yes, that did some good ones. That did interesting stuff with the monologuing.
Yeah.
So that would go across the different panels, wouldn't it?
Really good use of thirds.
Yes.
I really like the use of thirds there. Yeah, panel layout became a thing in the podcast, didn't it?
That's going to be the thing we get known for. It's like
they review panel layouts.
Someone's going to be like, excuse me, excuse me, Tom King, you've won an award. I've not heard of who's gifting the award. It's the Comic Literate podcast, and apparently you won best layout. And he's going to be like, oh, I didn't do the layout for that title.
So just recently, I bought a medal for somebody as a joke. And I realised that I bought a medal and had it engraved for £2.50. And it was at that moment in my life that I realised that medals are now cheaper than greeting cards.
Wow.
So all of my family this year, instead of getting greetings cards, are getting engraved medals. I think when we do our cheers and jeers for the year, we should have some really nasty medals made up and send them to those people's press offices.
Nasty medals for positive awards.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll get the fuckers engraved.
Right.
And it'll be like Comic Literate podcast, Comic Literate year roundup awards, best panel layout, and then either their name or the title. And we just send it to them.
There's going to be a massive medal that's going to look like Flavor Flav's clock necklace. Just a massive plate of metal.
Well, what we'll do then is we'll just have the medal and it will say like the name of the award and the name of the winner, and then there'll be a little certificate that they can put on their fridge.
And it'll be laminated, because somehow we'll have access to a laminator.
If anybody's got a laminator.
Yeah, can you let us come around and use it?
It can be a Patreon reward. We come round and use your laminator.
Sword. All sword.
Should we get back to it?
I mean, I think we're done with the episode now, so we'll go into the ending.
Which is me. So, thank you very much for listening. As always, because I haven't had many responses on this yet. If you were doing anything interesting while you were listening to the podcast, please send us an email at comicliterate@gmail.com. I'd love to know what you're up to. And then, you can leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts from, hopefully Pocket Casts.
Yep.
Thank you so much for listening.
Any top reviews we will naturally read on the air.
Or any really offensive comments about the Nazis being socialists.
Yep, as long as you give us 5 stars, then we'll read out anything.
So thank you so much for your time, and have a lovely day or night.
Thank you, goodbye.
Bye.